Let's make a start then. We're recording, great. Okay, so welcome everybody to this one-day conference hosted by the University of Leeds that brings together scholars working in Spanish, Portuguese and Latin American film criticism. My name is Stephanie Dennison and I'm a professor of Brazilian Studies at the University of Leeds, and together with Nuria Triana Toribio, professor of Spanish at the University of Kent, we're the conveners of this conference. My introductory words will be brief. I want to talk about the genesis of the conference and what Nuria and I had in mind in terms of research questions we wanted to address and to offer some words of thanks. So the idea for the conference emerged from a conversation with Nuria back in 2019 that was spurred on by a research trip relating to my work on world cinema that I made to the University of Kent at the invite of Nuria that was sponsored by the Gulbenkian Institute in Kent. And Nuria and I have had shared interests for some time. Together with two of today's speakers, Deborah Shaw and Sarah Barrow, we worked on a project on transnational Hispanic cinema over 10 years ago now. And I have Nuria to thank for introducing me to the concept of film culture and Janet Harbord's work. Both of us have published books on film culture, and so together with Deborah, Sarah, and another of today's speakers, Dolores Tierney, with whom we have also collaborated, our research is informed by a very broad understanding of screen studies, whether you choose to call this film culture, new film history, paratextual analysis, or beyond the screen studies. Scrolling down. Bringing film criticism to bear on our understanding of film culture seemed a logical next step for both of us. Nuria was becoming increasingly interested in film literacy, and it is the relationship between criticism and film literacy in Spain that she will be exploring in her talk today with Jara Fernández Meneses. In my case, I had just published with Maite Conde the first edited volume in English of the essays of Brazilian film critic, cultural commentator, and public intellectual Paulo Emílio Salles Gomes. So we put together a bid to the Modern Humanities Research Association Conference Fund, and we were successful. And as most of you here today know, we were all set to hold a face-to-face conference this time last year, but it didn't happen. So here we are on Zoom a year later. I'm feeling slightly awkward. I wouldn't normally feel this awkward with this group of people if I was with them in the room, I assure you, with an almost intact program and with the added bonus of a Q&A with one of Brazil's most successful online film critics, Pablo Vilaça. So the thanks then are to the University of Kent, Gulbenkian Institute, the University of Leeds, the MHRA, and to all our panelists and panel chairs for sticking with us. And I really want to acknowledge just how incredible this group of academics is that we have managed to assemble. These are very much experts in their field. And I won't call them heavyweights. That might be a bit of a sensitive comment to make during lockdown. Definitely not heavyweights in that sense. Our starting point when thinking about criticism was to interrogate the impact of the shift away from what we define as analogue forms of film criticism, so for example, hard copy newspapers and magazines, to digital forms, online newspapers, and increasingly beyond these to dedicated internet sites, social media, YouTube, podcasts, etc. I've already given you a sense of some of the different ways our speakers will be approaching addressing this question. And these approaches also include reflections on the experience of a newspaper film critic in Portugal, as is the case of Sérgio Diaz Branco, and Fernando Ramos Arenas' tracing of the development of the hugely successful film criticism website Las Horas Perdidas in Spain. I want to highlight one of the initial questions we posed in our call for papers, and that was, to what extent does the internet facilitate a transnational consumption of film criticism, particularly in cultures of the same or similar languages? Now, to explain, this question partly emerges from our teaching background in modern languages and cultures, where the cultural production of Spain, Portugal, and Latin America, including Brazil, often sit together, what I now call the SPLAS phenomenon, whereby students graduate in something called Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American studies. So finding synergies between these countries' contemporary film cultures is often a goal, even while we continue to work within the more narrow confines of national cinema analysis, and while we recognize that often those synergies simply aren't there to start with. So we are certainly not trying to suggest that there is some kind of homogenous vision of film criticism that emerges from the film cultures in Spain, Portugal, and Latin America. That said, there is something to be gained from sharing experiences of these different film cultures by dint of their being non-Anglo, having a different relationship to the concept of national cinema, and the weight that might carry in terms of national identity. The place of the national in online criticism in Peru is something that Sarah Barrow will be exploring in her talk today, for example. In this context, we can also think of the symbiotic relationship between key art house film movements and criticism. And one of our speakers, Marcelo Iqueda, himself a film critic and filmmaker, as well as an academic, will be citing a very recent example of this phenomenon, the cinema de garagem, or garage cinema in Brazil. When we first planned this conference, we had no idea just how significant the digital world was going to become. As academics, we have, as a result of the pandemic, been forced online, but many of us continue to publish hard copies, and more often than not, expensive hardback copies of our research. Are we academics then what is left of analogue criticism? I'm keen to hear today from Deborah Shaw and Dolores Tierney, who will be touching on the very thorny issue of the popularization of academic film criticism. As well as the impact of a pandemic, we have, since organizing the conference, been encouraged in our research to reflect on the Black Lives Matter movement and the continuing impact of the Me Too movement. So the other question that I have become increasingly interested in since starting to work on this project is the extent to which the shift online has broadened the canon of films being discussed, and more significantly, the extent to which new critical voices are being heard. A number of our presenters will be discussing these issues. I think we all know that it is too facile an assumption to make that anyone these days can be a film critic. Nuria has recently put me onto the work of the Spanish film critic Desiree de Fez, who in her recent book Reina del Grito relates tales of the prejudice she has experienced as a critic in the male-dominated world of horror film. And Ivonete Pinto, the first woman president of Abracine, the Brazilian Film Critics Association, shared with me some recent statistics on their association membership. Roughly 70% of members are men and 80% are white. And while we're on the subject of Brazil, since the initial planning of the conference, the situation with regard to attacks on culture, the film industry, and those who speak out against the President Jair Bolsonaro have grown considerably worse. It will be interesting to hear what Pablo Vilaça, a film critic who is openly critical of the current government in Brazil, has to say about how all this has impacted on his work. So I don't mean to have brought the mood down before we've even got started, but this is a conference about criticism, and it's important that we remain constructively critical. So before I pass over to our first panelists, a final word of thanks to Alice Miller, PhD researcher working on the history of independent film exhibition in Leeds and our conference administrator. And Alice is going to be around today to keep us right. And since I am one of the most analogue people here today, I really couldn't have organised this without Alice's support. So thank you very much, Alice. So over then to Inês Diaz, who will chair our first panel. Inês is a lecturer in Portuguese at the University of Leeds and has research interests in Lusophone film culture and in particular in Brazilian and Mozambican cinema. Over to you, Inês.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the invitation and everyone, Alice involved. So I'm going to be chairing the first panel on the Iberian Peninsula. First, we will have a talk by Nuria Triana Toribio from Kent and Jara Fernández Meneses from UC3M. And I'm going to quickly read their bios. So Nuria Triana Toribio is an established scholar on the areas of the national cinema and popular culture in Spain. Her main research is in the fields of popular culture and subculture, Spanish punk, and film cultures. These two interests are linked by her long-standing interest in inclusions and exclusions in histories of cinema and popular culture, more broadly in areas such as national cinemas, popular genres, and auteurism. The Study of Film Festivals, Contemporary Hispanic Film Cultures, Film Criticism and Popular Music. Her latest books are Spanish Film Cultures and God Save the Queens, Pioneras del Punk, a co-edited book of interviews with Spanish, Portuguese, and Chicana punk women. She is also co-editor of the series Spanish and Latin American Filmmakers for Manchester University Press. Her most recent work has appeared in the Journal of Spanish Cultural Studies, Lectora, and Hispanic Research Journal. Her current project is on film literacy and the academia. Jara Fernández Meneses earned her PhD from the University of Kent. Her research focuses on the political economy of contemporary European cinema and Spanish popular culture. She has published in the peer-reviewed journals Secuencias, Revista de Historia del Cine, Film Studies, Studies in European Cinemas, New Cinemas, Journal of Contemporary Film, Hispanic Research Journal, and many others. And she has also written several chapters in edited books for the San Sebastián International Film Festival, Las Palmas International Film Festival, Seminci, Valladolid International Film Festival, Nosferatu, Peter Lang, and Tarrant Loblanche. She's currently working as an associated lecturer at the University Carlos III in Madrid and as a research assistant at Exeter University. She's a member of the editorial board of the film section of Modern Languages Open, University of Liverpool, and she conducts her current research in two international research groups, TecMerin, Televisión, Cine, Memoria, Representación e Industria of the University Carlos III of Madrid, and De Visiones, Discursos, Genealogías y Prácticas de Creación Visual Contemporánea of the University Autónoma of Madrid. And so Nuria and Jara's paper is entitled The Demise of Spanish Film Criticism, Future Film Cultures when Film Education is at Stake. So go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to share the PowerPoint now.
Thank you.
So can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. Right. So we're going to do one of these things that at the moment they're doing, they used to be doing when they were updating us on COVID, which is one of us, I'm going to have to say, next slide, please, so that Hannah knows when to move on, or maybe not, I don't know, I'm not sure. Anyway, the purpose of today's paper is to describe really a series of initiatives that are aimed at keeping film cultures alive and also at producing the next generation of cinephiles and hopefully of film critics. And so obviously you have we have to place this caveat before everything that things are in suspended animation at the moment because COVID-19 has affected everything to do with the traditional idea of cinema viewing, and these initiatives as well have a lot to do with face-to-face and in class work. So we'll see how these things are developed. But these initiatives are things that both Jara and I are very interested in. In the case of Jara, she is actually involved in developing some of these initiatives. But again, what we want to do here is mostly tell the story of how these initiatives are developing, where they're coming from, and then have some queries and some ideas of things that we might want to keep an eye on as these initiatives are developed. So if we could have next slide, please, number 2. Thank you. So the multiple crises that affect film criticism in particular are also crises that are affecting film cultures widely. And those are, of course, the crisis of authority. You know, do we really need critics that are authoritative experts? The crisis of cinema itself, of course, which is very important. You know, is cinema going to survive? Particularly now is a very acute question. For those of us who have a foot on the analog culture, like some of us here, this idea of film as we have experienced it, the cinema as we know it, cinema as a specific form of entertainment and a form of knowledge, which has a pre-internet life, weighs very heavily still on the forms of criticism and the forms of film knowledge for the future. The conception of cinema as heritage as well, which is something that a nation needs to conserve and to pass on to the next generation, is also something that is very much premised on this traditional idea of cinema that is all connected with one foot on the analog and one foot on the digital. These traditional film values, or these traditional film cultures, as we want to call it, are what is most at risk right now. There's other things that might be easier to just develop on the internet, but this traditional idea of film culture, this traditional idea of knowledge and an idea of national cinema is perhaps what is most at risk. The ills affecting traditional film cultures are very tightly connected. And as we are addressing in this paper today, also very tightly connected are the responses are coming from institutions such as film academies, film archives, supranational and national and even regional filmotecas and cinetecas. All these official kind of curators and gatekeepers of cinema are responding to this crisis in a very similar way. So in the next slide, I can show you the beginning of the very large portion that the European Commission dedicates to to media literacy, right? And media literacy is one of the large campaigns that the executive division of the EU, of the European Commission, is in charge of drafting and of devolving to the different nations to make sure that all Europe has legislation to protect the users of media, particularly the youngest ones. So these media literacy campaigns are very focused on educating children about the dangers of the internet and about the skills that need to be learned in order to use the internet properly. And it's actually under this umbrella of media literacy that the film literacy campaigns are going to be included. Because one of the things that these media literacy campaigns want to do is to be able to create jobs in the film industries. I mean, in the media industries in general, but in the film industries in particular. So it's about protecting the users, but it's also about giving them the skills so that they can work in these industries. So this is how the film literacy has been developed in Europe under the umbrella of media literacy and using some of the skills that media literacy campaigns are putting together. And the key supranational institution which has taken care of this has been a European Film Academy. They have been the ones who have understood that, as Jennifer Green says in one of the European Film Academy publications last year, the European film industry is very aware that either they create the next generation of cinephiles and the next generation of film goers and film cultures, or film disappears as an industry and as a heritage. So for them, it's very important to create all these initiatives that to ensure that there is a continuity towards the future for this. So how do they do it? Well, their strategy has been to generate film literacy campaigns, sending people to schools or giving material, creating material that could be used in school, to create enhanced viewings, which is viewings where school children are invited, but they have added experiences, not just watching the film, but there's discussion or maybe plays and voting, all sorts of extra enhancements of the viewing themselves. The Young People's Award, which is I think is in this following slide, The EFA Young People's Award, which has been running for a number of years, is dedicated to getting participants from different schools in different European countries to pick films and also to talk about cinema and to have an experience not just of choosing films, but also of meeting other European children, school children in other countries. And of course, one of the ideas behind all the EFA Young Audience Awards, besides this idea of film literacy, is actually another purpose is Europeanization. Through these kind of discussions and through these media literacy and film literacy campaigns, we're also creating an idea of European shared heritage in film. And again, this is the kind of things that are hoped will be creating an idea, a supranational identity for this children's generation. And I think Jara now is going to talk about what she has experience of, which is what some film festivals are doing, and particularly what the Cineteca, which is the institution she works in, is doing. I just have to mention just before, can we go back one?
Mm-hmm.
Just before Jara tells us about what's going on in institutions in Spain, just to say that when the Cineteca, when the Academia de las Artes y Ciencias Cinematográficas de España was created in the late 80s or the mid 80s, film education was not really high on their agenda. Their idea of film education was just working with higher education, with universities and those kinds of more highbrow critics and highbrow understanding of film. But this has changed, and of course, particularly since the presidency of Yvonne Blake, who sadly died in 2018, film education started to mean something completely different. So, Jara, I don't know if you want to take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Nuria. Well, as Nuria has said, I do work, I have a foot on the academia, but I also have a foot in the institution because I have been working for the last 4 years and a half as a field programmer in Cineteca. Cineteca is a public cinema which is run by Madrid City Council and which is located in the Art Hubs Matadero. I also had worked as a film critic for 10 years for the Spanish version of Calles du Cinema. So my approach to this kind of film literature is both from the perspective of an academic, but also from the perspective of a person who is actually working in the institution. So in Spain, as Nuria has said already, there are several institutions engaged in film literacy. We are going to focus only in since we don't have that much time, I would like to mention the initiatives that are being run by Filmoteca Española. Almost is worth mentioning that almost every Filmoteca, regional Filmoteca in Spain, from the Catalan Filmoteca, the Galician Filmoteca, the Basque Filmoteca, they all run education programs. So it's something that is a strategy that is applied by almost every institution in Spain. But Filmoteca Española, since it's the national Filmoteca, it leads the strategy. So Filmoteca Española has 2 different programs of film literacy. One is called Filmoteca Junior, which is aimed at school children, and the other one is Educa Filmoteca, which is aimed at secondary school students. Filmoteca has a more classical approach to film literacy, which is mainly based in screening a selection of films which constitute the canon that Filmoteca decides. And these screenings are accompanied by the Filmoteca team, educational team, which contextualize the screening and explain to the young audience what the films are about and how they can understand those films. However, we are more interested in the pioneering activity that the European Film Festival of Seville started back in 2015, because it represents a program to film literacy which changed the focus. So it's not so much about creating the canon or screening the canon to the young audience, so the young audience can understand and can know and can get access to that canon, but it's more a program that goes from above to the top. This program, which is called Jóvenes Programadores, or young programmers, the idea is that they have to select one film from the official competition, and they have to present that film within the festival. So the idea underlying this program is they have to set the program criteria, to develop programming knowledge, and to justify their choices. And so the idea is that they have to learn about the programming process from the inside. Of course, they are always guided by the education team. So it's in one sense, the idea is that the young audience can decide about their own taste, always limited to the films that are available, which do come from the official selection. But in this sense, is, as I've said before, is more an approach from the bottom to the top. The same approach is the one that we use in Cineteca, with the program that Cineteca has been running for the last 10 years, but this program started back in 2018, and it's called Cinezeta. And the idea is following the Seville Film Festival program. The idea is also to have young, we selecting people between 16 to 26 years old through a public call, and they are allowed to create a monthly free film program with a twofold aim. On the one hand, we want to provide them with the formal training, so not just from a theoretical perspective, but they get to know how the programming work is from inside, because they have to take care of everything since selecting the films. They also have to negotiate the screening rights. They also have to communicate the programs. So, and they have complete freedom to choose whatever they want to screen. So they have complete freedom to build their own canon, so to speak. And the second aim of the programs is also to bring the young audience to an institution they don't usually attend. So through this program, we also want to guarantee that Cineteca gets to the younger audience. And pretty much that's it.
Just to finish, we wanted to say that, of course, we are very happy that these initiatives are taking place, and we know that they are connecting with the audience. But we also want to ask you, and perhaps at the time at the end we will discuss this a little bit. What are the caveats of these initiatives? From our point of view, is the idea that you want to create a transnational consumption, you want children and young people to connect with transnational products, but not everything is subtitled, not everything is available, not everything travels. So you end up perpetuating the things that are easily transmittable, and those tend to be, male directors of a certain weight in the national cinema, but not necessarily the work of younger people, of people who are not white, or of people who are not clearly linked to the establishment. So we have our own, we've got reservations about these initiatives. We know that the next future generation of critics needs to be created, but we also want to interrogate more whether these are the right tools for doing that. And that's all from us, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Nuria and Jara, for such a wonderful presentation. Now we're going to head to the second presentation by Fernando Ramos Arenas from Complutense in Spain. And the title of his presentation is Lost Hours of Cinephilia. And so Dr. Dr. Fernando Ramos Arenas is Associate Professor at the Department of Art History at Complutense University in Madrid, where he directs the research project Film Culture in Transition. Sorry. From 2010 to 2017, he was assistant professor at Leipzig University in Germany, where he earned his PhD. In 2010, and directed the project Cinephilia Under the Dictatorship. He has been Marie Curie Fellow, and in 2017-18, he was visiting researcher at Georgetown University, Washington, DC. He has published one monograph on film authorship in 2011, edited 2 volumes, and written several articles in leading research journals, such as the Historical Journal of Film, Radio, and Television. Well, then there's one in German that I can't pronounce, Median, and I think it's Media and Communications.
It's not so important, yeah. It's
Media History, Hispanic Research Journal, and Journal of Spanish Cultural Studies, mainly on the topic of film cultures in Spain and Germany. So welcome, Fernando. Let's hear to Lost Hours of Cinephilia. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to discuss these subjects that we all been working on for ages, feel sometimes, but we usually don't have the context to talk about them. So in my presentation, I'm going to would like to consider certain tendencies in Spanish film criticism in the new millennium. And I will do it by focusing on a quite small case study, which is Las Horas Perdidas. So I'm going to talk about another generation, not the generation Nuria and Jara already talked about. But I think there are some subjects related to this example that are also related to the problems or to the issues Nuria mentioned at the end of her presentation. So I think the Q&A part of the panel will be quite interesting in this regard. So let's start with Las Horas Perdidas, which was from 2003 to 2019, one of the main websites in the Spanish film community, I would say. It's all relative in the world of internet, but it started as an amateur movie blog, ran short entries, and rapidly evolved into a bigger enterprise, and already established around 2004, 2005. LHP was producing criticism, but also interviews, longer essays on film culture, live reports during special events, and also some podcasts. In 2009, I think that's important in order to understand the relevance of the website. LHP, from now on, was selected by the daily newspaper El Mundo among the 100 more relevant blogs on the internet. From 2011 till 2018, it became part of the Condé Nast group, the movie blog or cinema site of the GQ magazine, while still maintaining its own editorial line. The page was daily refreshed with shorter entries, and it also published a longer text on about twice a week. And these were usually criticism on individual films, but also longer pieces on aspects such as film consumption, file sharing, technological developments on the field, or legislation, interviews, well, a lot of things, a lot of different subjects. Active for 16 years, LHP was singular among its peers in its success and relevance. However, it might be also representative for other similar sites, other blogs or forums or webs that started with the general spread of the internet at the beginning of the 21st century. An important part of the critical reconsideration of cinephilia in the last 20 years has focused on the disruptive character of this digital revolution for the film culture in general, and especially for film criticism. Understood as transnational and transmedia, as a transnational transmedia enterprise, this new cinephilia around blogs was usually seen in opposition to the difficulties of traditional paper magazines fighting to conciliate national film culture realities with the requirements of a shared international space. New forms of engagement with films were thought to bring new discourses and new ways of building a relation to the medium or to the medium. And traditional cinephilia built around an elitist, male, hierarchical practices and discourses, organized also around some well-defined cultural urban centers, was thought to be challenged by these new approaches, where the subjective love of the movies take very different and often enough very unconventional forms, embracing the new technologies such as DVDs or the internet, and funding communities and shared experiences. Those are the words of Thomas Elsässer, who tried to figure out what was going on in 2005 and published, I think, a well-known text on these matters in the volume I'm showing right now, this Cinephilia Movies, Love and Memory. More than a decade ago, around the time where LHP was starting to gain some momentum, Sperp and Wasserbach insisted indeed on blogging as one of the key factors of this new cinephilia, of a decentralized cinephilia in the age of digital reproduction. And it is with these ideas in mind that I want to reflect on certain aspects of the site, of this website. As mentioned in the abstract you may have read, I would like to focus first on its dialogue, or conflicted dialogue with tradition and canon, analyzing both the groundbreaking ductus of the first entries, but also an integration in a longer genealogy of film commentary. Today, almost 20 years later, I think we have come to a point where we can try to historize what happened then, and maybe reconsider the complex nature beyond a history of continuity and rupture. Second, and considering especially the title of the conference, I'm also very interested in reflecting on the local variations of these phenomena, on a certain Spanishness of this kind of film criticism that at the same time was understood itself as mainly transnational. LHP, I think, maintain a conflicted, tense relation to a certain part of, or to a bigger part of national cinema that I consider also significant for an important part of the national film debate from the 1990s onwards. So the same year, Movie Mutations by Rosenbaum and Martin proclaimed a new way of thinking and writing about the medium. LHP was born with a strong focus on American commercial genre cinema. And this focus was maintained throughout its existence. For instance, 1980s action movies were usually epitomized as models, while contemporary blockbusters were celebrated as and discussed in depth. Of course, this was not the only kind of film presented, but I think they were central to forge the identity of the block during its first years. The site was structured around the work of its 4 founding members. 2 others came later from a discussing forum created around the block. But I suppose you could say that around 2004, 2005, the working group was already constituted or established. They were responsible for most of the content. Some of them also had professional ties to the audiovisual industry. I think that's important to consider. And they care for maintaining a cohesive publishing line, but sporadically they also let other contributors to share their texts. As usual in the history of film culture, this was also a generational endeavor. I think that's important to understand why do they like certain kind of films, or why do they discuss a certain kind of films in a certain kind of way. In this case, this applies to critics born in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And I think that also applies to the audiences. My general impression is that as the block got older, so did its loyal readers, who came apparently from Spain, but increasingly also from Central and South America, from Mexico, from Colombia, from Argentina. This was mainly a boys' club, especially visible in the podcast, in its humor, in the use of scatological language, in the values and references. And as far as I can see, there was also strong male presence along the readership. The only woman belonging to the original group took care of festivals and wrote texts on individual films during the award seasons. She didn't really contribute directly to the editorial line of the site. And I think it's interesting to see how she was treated by the readers with such an over politeness that was somehow out of place if we consider the way other critics were treated. No? This is a very subjective opinion or a very subjective impression. I think you have to read a lot of the text to get to this conclusion, but I think there is something to it. I think seen from our present time, it sometimes strikes me as somehow paternalist or somehow condescending. But I suppose we will have to take a closer look at the whole text produced during this time. The format was decisive. Although controlled by this small group of writers, the site usually engaged in vivid dialogue with its readers. This was film criticism in the age of Web 2.0. Long comment threads reflected film culture in transition, where interactivity was key. And in it, blogs were places of communication and interaction among peers. So criticism, following the example of Rosenbaum and Martin, I already mentioned, was not only a matter of spreading a more or less accepted doxa. I think it could be also seen as a practice in dialogue. But blogs were also a place where readers engaged as active content producers. Despite the control in the editorial line, the commentary sections were usually used to present new texts, new critics on the same films. So long contributions of several paragraphs were penned by the readers. And in my interviews with some representative of the field, of this blog field that started to spread at the beginning of the 21st century, I usually heard that blogs were for them a way of building a community they were missing. Indeed, I think that's important to point out, the distance to traditional film criticism was clear. It was seen as belonging to a completely different realm, and there is no significant dialogue with the Spanish film magazines of the time. Actually, I had the impression that in the eyes of the bloggers, they were not existing, they were not really taken into account. In this process, a certain tone in the dialogue was capital, I think. It was ironic, it was fresh, and of course, very, very personal. And it usually protected, or it should protect against the traps of cinephilia nostalgia, I suppose, while also creating its own golden ages. Considering the film references I mentioned at the beginning, 1980s action films, for instance, it might sound strange to talk about LHP as a cinephilian enterprise. However, I think the term can be helpful to understand the cultural relevance of the site and its historical significance. In this regard, I'm against essentializing cinephilia as an analytical category. I agree with Girish Shambu's observations that about the way multiple cinephilias thrive, especially in these online forums, and I think that's it's appropriate to understand the critical enterprise of this blog. LHP adapted the passion for popular genre film and art film in a very highly specialized fashion. And while writers and readers seem really knowledgeable in film history and analysis, usually mentioning obscure references, at least for my ears, they also had a joyful provocative mix, or they also offered a joyful provocative mix of high and low art. Most of them seem to know the history, the cahiers du cinéma, the auteurs, the classics of film criticism. But they were also dying to comment on the latest films by David Fincher or Alex de la Iglesia, or on films such as The Dark Knight or Star Wars or Avengers, which received more than 800 comments on the site. The official line, however, of the page of the blog was more conservative. This is, for instance, what they published of the list of the best films of 2018. which, as you can see, well, in which you can see one finds well, little to no surprises. International art cinema, with a notable Spanish exception from Rodrigo Sorogoyen, El Reino. The limits in its scope, I think, were near the high end or highbrow end. The auteurs usually celebrated by the new cinephilia at the beginning of the 21st century, and I'm thinking about people like Claire Denis, Pedro Costa, Kelly Reichardt, Lisandro Alonso, Lucrecia Martel were not really mentioned in the site. The blog was also traditional in its struggle to go beyond the usual European and North American references, and its reluctance to discuss, for instance, Portuguese or Latin American cinemas. I think it's paradoxical that in order to attract film buffs from both sides of the Atlantic, they have to to find a common ground on American cinema. At the same time, or at the time of LHP's birth, internet was about to be revamped as a global cinematic. It promised to be extremely generous in its possibilities, but I think it turned out to be quite often very repetitive in its offering. So I think this other aspect of what digital revolution must also be taken into account. This fan-code cinephilia was also not really interested in engaging in discourses of avant-garde cinema. And I'm talking about the kind of cinema that since approximately, I don't know, 30 years has found in the museum or in the art gallery or festival the kind of exposure and validation usually missing in the theaters. So coming back to a term I mentioned about 3 or 4 minutes ago, I'm well aware that the term Web 2.0, I used to sum up some of these characteristics, may sound for us today a little bit outdated. It was deliberate. My aim was to remind us of some of the promises of change usually associated with this online film criticism that started to emerge at the turn of the century. And I think almost 20 years after its emergence, it is the continuities to previous forms of film criticism that strike me the most. Continuities we may have overseen as we were happily proclaiming the transformation of cinephilia in the age of digital reproduction. Because yes, LHP stood for its kind of transnational and transmedia cinephilia that has embraced the new technologies that flourished on the internet and found its joy in the fetishism of the technique or in the Netflix series, a cinephilia that didn't have much time to mourn too long on the death of movie theaters. But it also stands for a celebration of the auteurs, such as Billy Wilder, Stanley Kubrick, for the publication of sound texts by the Chilean auteur Raúl Ruiz, or for an in-depth analysis of the shower scene in Psycho. On a more practical level, and apart from the shorter entries on more banal subjects, the blog stayed loyal to certain forms of critical interaction with the readers that from our perspective seemed quite traditional. Criticism on individual films was produced through long, edited, well-structured pieces that offer in-depth analysis. They were proud, the writers of the bloggers were really proud of this kind of approach and put special value on writing. We are not YouTubers, mentioned with pride one of the people I interviewed. There is also a certain tension observed, especially in the last, 5 years, in engaging with social media. Twitter was used to promote the contents of the site, but hardly used in another way. Social media were seen as too direct and too unreflective or incapable to a certain point of generating the kind of film cultural discussion or dialogue that the site wanted to promote. Now, in order to further understand what it is, let's focus on 2 significant aspects missing of the site, in the site, on the blind spots of LHP. Politics are significantly absent from the discussions. This is not only characteristic for this particular blog. For a casual observer like myself, it seems to be shared by most of the popular blogs emerging around this time. Indeed, this absence is so obvious and extended on these sites that it is actually quite difficult to realize that it is actually missing. Only in comparison with historical variation, it becomes clear and quite telling. One could read this also as another example of postmodern fan club cinephilia, so different, for instance, from the ideological debates of the 1970s. But the same goes for the present time. If this kind of block were to emerge now, I think it could be with a very different sensitivity towards identity politics or cultural wars in general. So I suppose you could say, okay, different times, different kind of criticism, maybe. But I also find there are some telling characteristics that connect this particular case and many others with the Spanish film culture at the beginning of the 21st century. Being openly non-political was for LHP, I suppose, that's my interpretation at least, a way of distancing itself from film criticism that over decades, even after the dictatorship, have been deeply intertwined with the cultural anti-Francoism and championed politically engaged quality films in the European art house tradition as the epitome of Spanish national cinema. Indeed, Spanish film cinema in general and its main references were also significantly rare in the site. Significant auteurs were missing. There is no Saura, no Gutiérrez Aragón, no Camus, almost no Erice. And this was especially striking in the early years, although it changed gradually. After that, we find more interested in the work of young directors, to which the site, or with whom the site could kind of build or share some artistic sensibilities, certain taste for popular and genre cinema, similar references, etc. In this regard, LHP is representative of an important part of the Spanish film culture of the 1980s and mid-1990s, a certain generation that grew completely uninterested or disconnected to the national cinema. From the 1980s onwards, young Spanish film enthusiasts, and I count myself in, were raised on a film diet that showed little to no interest in the contemporary national products of quality. Nuria Triana Toribio has studied some of the cultural policies that contributed to this phenomenon, but I think this and other similar blocks may be seen as a later result of this transformation. In summary, as already mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, LHP was singular in some of its characteristics, but also representative for an important transformation of Spanish film criticism at the beginning of the 21st century. These kind of experiences has been usually seen as the first steps toward a revolution brought along by the internet. But I think that today, 20 years after the first examples, it's time to pay more attention to the continuities with a longer tradition in the history of national film criticism. Thank you very much. I think I'm on time. Yeah. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone is doing great on time. So now we're heading to our last but not least presentation by Sérgio Diaz Branco from the University of Coimbra, entitled Valuing Films, Reflections on the Practice of Film Criticism. And Sérgio Diaz Branco is Assistant Professor of Film Studies at the University of Coimbra, where he coordinates the Laboratory for Investigating and Practicing Art, LIPA, and directs the MA in Art Studies. He studied film studies at the University of Kent. He was president of the Association of Moving Image Researchers between 2018 and 2020, and member of its direction board between 2014 and 2020. His articles have been published in the Journal of Lusophone Studies and La Talent, Revista de Estudios Cinematográficos, among others. He co-edits Conversations, the Journal of Civilian Studies, and is the author of Por Dentro das Imagens, Obras de Cinema, Ideias do Cinema, Within Images, Filmwork, Cinema Ideas, from 2016. So let's hear Sérgio Diaz Branco on Valuing Films, Reflections on the Practice of Film Criticism.
Thank you very much, Inês. I would like to thank Stephanie for the invitation and this opportunity. It's really great that we were able to get together and do this online. So let me just share my screen. Okay. Okay. So the publication of a book that collects my film criticism over a period of 20 years, which is this book, Escrita em Movimento, Apontamentos Críticos sobre Filmes, in English, Writing in Motion, Critical Notes on Films. The cover has an image from a film directed by a female filmmaker, Teresa Villaverde, which is called Colo. So this was an opportunity for me to reflect on this practice of film criticism. I have written for daily and weekly newspapers, printed and online magazines and websites, and so my reflections emerge from these multiple experiences. So my first topic is film criticism as incomplete and provisional by nature, that is, as conversation. The expression critical notes that I use intends to signal that I have always considered short pieces of film criticism as texts made of annotations about films, to which I try to give some coherence, but which can be remade, complemented, and developed. And in some cases, they were. So the phrase critical notes is marked by openness and thus reflect the unfinished character of conversations around films and about film as art. In this sense, the writing in motion that I allude to in the title is also a way of responding to the motion of film, to its changeableness, to its moving images. Each text is a moment of affirmation that the film, which is the subject of criticism, feeds the, and I quote, daily reflection of the critic, unquote, as Bazin once wrote. So each encounter with the film renews a persistent open question. What is cinema? And this, of course, is the question posed in the title of Bazin's famous anthology of texts. It is a persistent open question, not because it has no answer, but because it has many answers. This take is also crucial for constructing a discourse across different pieces of writing. The selection and editing of these articles became for me a process of rediscovering my own critical discourse. In a sense, we write from what we are. In a very real sense, we write what we are, articulating our ability for attention with our power of analysis. And these are not givens or rare gifts, but simply modes of experiencing more fully our connections with films and also of conversing more fruitfully about them with other viewers. I therefore found the same voice and the same conviction in different forms. Following this reasoning, criticism should be a firm and daring exercise of freedom. And in my case, it cannot be disconnected from my convictions about the art of film, its humanistic value, its intersection of the aesthetic and the ethical, and its imagination of new perceptions. These discoveries through my own work connect with two ideas that are related with the practice of film criticism as conversation. One from Bazin and the other one from James Agee. In In 1955, Bazin remarked, "What Sartre wrote about the novel is true of all arts, cinema as well as painting. All technique refers to a metaphysics." So in this view, all technical decisions that shape film style are linked with an understanding of what reality is and with a kind of participation in what it is, mediating and transforming it. Bazin tells us that the foundation of reality is somehow reflected in art as discovery and creation. Technique is therefore thought of as a set of procedures and a complex of choices situated in history and culture. It creates and integrates details that identify and single out films beyond their origin. In short, it is a dialectic of inscription and expression rooted in reality that opens up conversations. Now, in 1942, Agui wrote, "It is my business to conduct one end of a conversation as an amateur critic among amateur critics, and I will be of use and of interest only insofar as my amateur judgment is sound, stimulating, or illuminating." The critic as amateur is open to the experience of the new, aware of the limits of her or his knowledge, available to rethink and revise. Jean Duché argues that criticism is the art of loving, and for that reason, he prefers the word amateur, the one who loves, instead of critic. His point is that what he calls an official critic is not necessarily an amateur, while the amateur, even when lacking the same capacity for expression, reveals a critical attitude by her or his mere choice of love. Agui links a similar use of the word amateur with the notion of criticism as conversation, which we also find in Stanley Cavell's critical and philosophical readings of films. The attempt not to isolate film as a phenomenon is my second topic. Art can be lots of different things and take many forms, but it is still an historical and social phenomenon like politics and religion. Cinematic art is not a remote field of activity, disconnected from the world. As a perceptual experience, aesthetic fact, or representation, film is part of the changing fabric that makes up the world as a social and historical reality. According to Sergio Daney, this ends up defining precisely what he terms the critical function. So the critical function is to write film criticism as a way of understanding films, but above all, as a way to understand how the world that they express and build is related to the world around them that they also integrate. Indeed, art exists in the web of society, not above it, not below it, not apart from it. Taking this relation into account gives us the means to avoid neglecting the conditions in which art originates, develops, and communicates. This restores the social implantation of the work of art as a cultural production to a critical discourse that approaches each work simultaneously and dialectically in its singularity and as a part of a whole. This obviously works on two planes: the original context of film production, as well as the manifold circumstances of film analysis and interpretation. And here is useful to contrast the actions of evaluating and valuing. A resistance to seeing films and other works of art as commodities is deeply related with the resistance to evaluation in the sense of quantification of value. So in the economy of criticism, this quantified value is really an exchange value expressed in stars and thumbs, hyperboles and superlatives, leading to ranking and a kind of trading. In a recent essay on Pierre Bourdieu, Cavell, and the politics of aesthetic value, Benjamin Mangram argues for the need to rebel against conventions. And the commodification of films via evaluation is such a convention. Of course, transforming our conventions about how we discuss films cannot be separated from the production of films and their social circulation. Criticism is also a way of cherishing and honoring the work of those people whose work and collaboration produces a film. Moreover, as I contended, film art does not exist apart from concrete human life and its productions of consciousness. It is undoubtedly a specific cultural production, but exactly because this is so, it is a form that embodies perspectives, experiences, ideas, a form that gives its substance, and it has social as well as personal resonance. So about this rejection of evaluation, this is a quote from Manny Farber, in which he says it's practically worthless for a critic. And I'll leave you with this quote. So, and this quote really introduces my last point and the conclusion about film criticism and value. So lastly, I address a topic that is deeply related to the previous two topics, the discussion about the role of value in film criticism. And it is a sort of corollary in the sense that conversing and participating through film criticism are different ways of valuing films. In these concluding remarks, I flesh out the distinction between evaluating and valuing in order to specify what we can value in films. So at the root of the words criticism, criterion, and crisis is the Greek krinein, which means to separate, to decide, to discern, to judge. Hippocrates explains that crisis is the point of turn of a disease. As such, criticism appears as a kind of decisive practice, a practice through which we decide our understanding of art through the reflection on a particular work of art. Consequently, the relationship between criticism and judgment has less to do with sentencing and more to do with appreciating, less to do with evaluating in the sense of determining the value, and more to do with valuing, giving value. So in this sense, criticism may be defined simply as an argued appreciation of the value of a work of art, for instance, a film. It is worth pointing out, however, that art provides aspects that may be valued beyond their aesthetic function, which is frequently abstracted from other possible functions, say, for example, epistemic, emotional, or political. Indeed, criticism connects the critic with the artists as creative and complementary agents in conversation, as Oscar Wilde's The Critic as Artist and Stanley Cavell's Music Discomposed indicate. Noel Carroll writes that, and I quote, criticism is primarily committed to the discovery and illumination of what is valuable in artworks, unquote, stating further that it does not intend, and I quote again, intend thereby to imply that criticism is not also concerned to identify this value in artworks, but that this is a lesser charge than that of isolating what is valuable. So this is from Carol's book on criticism, published by Routledge. Value value is what we look for most in all criticism, Carol concludes. Despite the fact that evaluation is for him fundamental in criticism, he grants that this does not mean that the critic clearly states the value that he or she ascribes to the work. This leads him to identify two forms of evaluation, implicit and explicit, contending that, and I quote, the evaluative moment in criticism need not be explicit, unquote. In saying this, he seems to depart from what I have been calling evaluating, which in my view is always explicit because it requires quantification and hierarchization. In addition, when he puts the focus on the practice of criticism, on what is valuable or not in artworks, is advocating what I've been calling valuing. In tackling the issues of value in film criticism, we may be tempted or forced to choose between those who think that evaluation is a central aspect of such practice and those who do not. Nevertheless, taking sides in this way takes for granted that we know the role that value plays in film criticism. Even those writers who deliberately eschew the announcement of judgments, a position defended and adopted by Alex Clayton and Andrew Cleven in a recent essay collection on the language and style of film criticism, they also deal with value. Such critics try to articulate in language a kind of film criticism that does justice to what they have experienced and thought when watching a film, calling attention to features of the films in which they find value and in some cases disvalue. As Clayton and Cleven say, the best criticism deepens our interest in individual films, reveals new meanings and perspectives, expands our sense of the medium, confronts our assumptions about value, and sharpens our capacity to discriminate. And it strives to find it strives to find expression for what is seen and heard, bringing a realm of sounds, images, actions, and objects to meet the realm of words and concepts, unquote. Notice how in the middle of this list of purposes, we find one that has directly to do with value. And arguably, all of them have indirectly to do with value. They write that relevant film criticism confronts our assumptions about value. One way of fleshing out this would be to say that pertinent film criticism provides opportunities for the critical analysis of what we accept as value and of the aspects we find valuable in films. It therefore makes us aware of the possibilities for the valuing of other features of a film based on other reasons. The usefulness of the distinction between evaluating and valuing in film criticism also depends on the confrontation of our assumptions. If evaluating means quantifying value, valuing signifies qualifying value, showing that value claims are different from evaluative claims. If film criticism is to be as alive as film itself, it cannot be connected with the measurement of value. It has to be linked with the expression of the attributes of a film that the critic propounds as valuable or not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sergio, for respecting the time and for such a fascinating presentation. Thank you, all the presenters. And so this means we have plenty of time. We have 30 minutes for questions. So you can type them on the chat box, on the Q&A, or just open your microphones and go ahead. So maybe I can start with the first question that has already been asked on the Q&A by Donna Kircher to Nuria and Jara. So I'm going to read it. So to what extent do or could the young programmers of, for example, the Aula Sin Fin access or link their project to learn how to program with the important film festivals in Spain? Looking back, for instance, to the past year's offering of the festivals. These festivals, in my knowledge, San Sebastián, seem to be undertaking and opening up toward women and minority perspectives. Have there been such collaborations? Many of these festivals also have film schools, another area of the up and coming.
I will answer that question, Nuria, if that's okay with you. Okay, thank you, Donna, for your question. As for the, we have, for the young programmers programs that we have, they have been, well, they have received some talks from senior programmers and festival directors, one of whom was Carlo from Berlinale, and the other one was also Rebordinos from San Sebastián. We tried to make an agreement with San Sebastián so they could go there and be part of the festival, but we did not manage to do so because, you know, both institutions and bureaucracy and so on, so we didn't get on time. However, the previous year, so the second edition of the program, they went to Gijón, to the Gijón Film Festival, and they took part into the activities of the festival and they could attend all the screenings. So yeah, we are trying to establish those kind of links with the major film festivals in Spain. And yes, of course, all the festivals have this or their own initiatives to educate young filmmakers and also young programmers. But yeah, I mean, pretty much those are the kind of links that we have been trying to establish. Not always have been successful, but we keep trying to do so. And I'm not sure about whether they are opening toward women and minorities perspectives. I can't answer that question because I don't have such kind of insight into San Sebastián. I know that they are making a huge effort to open and to broaden both in terms of jury and the films that they select and so on. But I don't know exactly about the training programs that they have. So I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you. Any more questions? You can just open. Fernando, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, thank you very much for to all of you for the presentation. They were really interesting. However, I would like to go back to something mentioned by Nuria at the end of her presentation, of the common presentation. If I recall it right, she kind of ended up in a pessimist tone about the potential capacities of this kind of initiatives, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on this subject. And yeah, that would be all. I mean, it's not really a question; just I want to know more about it.
Okay.
Or your perspective on that.
Yes, thanks, Fernando. I'll take this one, Jara, if that's okay with you. Okay. Now, the reasons why we are slightly concerned about these initiatives is not because we don't value them. We think they're really important.
Yeah.
It's because we are a little bit intrigued by how they look very. They look as though they are going to be perpetuating the same type of canon and the same type of perspective towards criticism of the past. And I was very interesting to hear what Sergio was saying. I mean, it's really fascinating to hear, you know, this discussion of what criticism could be, should be, and is. I thought that was very, very pertinent, you know, for this first panel. But one of the things that I am worried in these initiatives is that they're not going to be doing, they don't seem to be doing something that Sergio mentioned that I think is key to teach, to enable a generation of film critics who will be, going beyond preconceived ideas. What you said about how criticism should be not sentencing, but appreciating, right? And in these initiatives that we've seen so far, there is a lot of saying that, yes, this is what they want, and they're going to be very eclectic in what kinds of films and what kinds of cinematography, what kind of editing, what kind of mise-en-scène is going to be considered to be good or bad. But there's still a lot of sentencing, like there's still a lot of making lists of directors that every national cinema should study, making lists of who are the top cinematographers in a particular national cinema.
Mhm.
You see, those kinds of exercises are they're very tricky to manage in a way that will be inclusive, that will bring voices from the outside. So Fernando, that's where our pessimism or our slight skepticism comes from. You see what I mean?
Yeah. At the same time, I was wondering if the problem wouldn't be that with these kinds of initiatives, you're trying to reach two different goals. On the one hand, you're trying to teach. Let me put it this way: the canon, or to teach knowledge about cinema. So, and that goes hand in hand with a certain categories, I suppose. And at the same time, you're trying to question this. And I don't know if it is possible. I mean, I suppose it's possible, but it's quite tricky to kind of deal with these two different approaches. But I know Jara has something to say. Sorry.
Yeah, just for what you were saying. We also run, apart from the Young Programmers program, we also run another media literacy program, which is, it takes the classical approach of screening films, selected films that we do select. And at the very end, you find yourself, you might be challenging the canon, but at the very end, you're also creating a new canon. So for instance, for the last year, we use only films by women filmmakers, okay? But at the very end, you are doing a new canon. It might be challenging the canon, sorry, or the orthodox canon, but you can't escape the canon. And for instance, when you do those kind of programs, but for instance, when we do the Young Programmers program, one of the first sessions that the Young Programmers did was a playlist in YouTube. So they are screening YouTube videos. So the audience, if the audience liked the videos, they just thumb up and they kept with that video. If the audience didn't like the video, they just thumb down and they pass to the next video. So you realize how completely separate both worlds are. So when you just leave the young audience to screen whatever they want, the references, their canons, they don't have canon. It's just so, about different approaches to cinema and to the audiovisual. They also screen from TikTok, they also screen from Instagram. So you actually realize, and it happens also with my students, what I watch has nothing to do with what they watch. And but when you are doing these kind of programs of media literacy based on screening and contextualizing films, I think that you can't escape the canon, whatever the canon might be, or however you want to construct the canon. But at the very end, you get to do a list of the films that should be that they are worth being watched, and so it's complicated, I think.
Yeah. Can I say something about this? Just a follow-up from what Nuria said, and Fernando and Jara. I have the experience of teaching 2 modules on film history, And I'm constantly confronted with this problem of the canon and introducing other films. As you said, I don't think that the solution is simply to erase the films that we've studied for years. So, for example, of course, you need to show Citizen Kane. And perhaps more films, other films directed by Orson Welles. But at the same time, when you talk about European cinema, usually books are focus on French cinema and Italian cinema. So maybe introduce Spanish cinema a bit more. Introduce more films directed by women, for example. Introduce African cinema. So introduce more examples that in a way open up the idea that students may have about what cinema can be. So that's really my approach. So it's a kind of way to, in a way, show them the classics, if you will, or the canon, but at the same time introducing other films and other filmmakers which currently are excluded from books on film history, for example. So yeah.
Thank you. Also, we have another question on the Q&A from Laura Batitucci. So she says, hello, a film archivist from Brazil here. I wanted to know from Nuria and Jara, how do they think film criticism can help foster audiovisual archival culture, including but not limited to the university borders? At Cineteca de Madrid, is this film literacy program helping create awareness about archives and film preservation in general? So, Jara and Nuria?
Should I take this one, Nuria? The first part of the question, I think it's a very interesting question, and all the reflection and the debate on what the archive should be or is a very poignant one. I don't really know, I haven't thought about how film criticism can help to foster audiovisual archival culture. I have to be honest on this one. I haven't thought about that, so maybe Nuria wants to add something there. But at Cineteca, the problem that we have is that we are not an archive. So we don't have the means to have an archive. So Filmoteca Española does. And we do try to raise awareness about how important archives are and how important film preservation is, but we don't have the means to actually do it. So I'm afraid that I'm not saying that we are helping to create awareness. I mean, we are trying to do so, but we don't have the means to have an archive or to contribute to the archive in any way. But Filmoteca Española is doing a great work. They are doing a lot of programs in Film Archive, and they are using their own archives, and they are screening them, and they are contextualizing them. So they are doing a great job there. Yeah.
Just very quickly, the answer to that question is they're already doing that. Film critics in Spain, particularly in the traditional, in the most highbrow and traditional film magazines, regularly write about the importance of archival and you know, they also point out which has been restored recently, and they are part of the seasons that back up the screenings of those recently restored films. So this has been happening for a while. So I mean, at least in Spain and in France as well, I know it's part of the relationship between the filmotecas and the film libraries and the film critics of the most prestigious film magazines is very tight. So they feed each other, and they give ideas of things that should be preserved. The other area as well as archival work that film criticism should encourage and help is subtitling. I think a lot of the work that hasn't traveled in Spanish and Portuguese, which we as native speakers know, but hasn't been able to be studied abroad, and critics don't know abroad, is because it hasn't been able to travel because of lack of subtitling. So how can you learn? You were talking about Sergio. You were saying Citizen Kane. I'm obsessed. Citizen Kane. Well, you know what? I can teach film language very well without using Citizen Kane, and I would love to be using Portuguese and Brazilian films to teach the same film language ideas that I received through Citizen Kane. I mean, why cannot I use, I don't know, Aniki Bobo or El Espíritu de la Colmena, or to teach cinematography and to teach film language. Let's just not teach necessarily Orson Welles when we have such wealth of other examples. Anyway, I'll stop. Stephanie has a hand up. Yeah.
Yeah. So Stephanie,
Fernando, do you want to jump in there, because you're part of the panel? So you had your hand up too. Did you?
No. I mean, especially because it wasn't really. I haven't really have. Well, I've thought about this question of Citizen Kane or these big names you are supposed to mention while teaching film history, and it's a tough question. I don't know. I haven't. I think you should do it, although you don't have to, because at the end of the day, the students must know that there's this film, although they may know, well, they may like more, I don't know, Espíritu de la Colmena, whatever. But I think it's part of, and it's very personal, I think it's part of my responsibility towards these students. If they all, I'm teaching a course on film history for students of art history. So, and we only have 4 months to do it. So I think that at the end of the 4th month, the students must know there was somebody called Orson Welles and made this film, although they may not want to. I mean, you were talking about film analysis. I think that's another kind of, it's another box. But if we are talking about film history, it's important to know there was this guy there. Although I'm not really, I mention it, but I don't really go into this one. I don't know. It's a very, I think it's not the right topic to talk in this Well, no, because I don't really have an opinion, a strong opinion on it. It's just.
Sergio, I know you want to answer that, but I'm just going to continue. I'll just slot in my kind of sort of question, because I can see lots of hands up. So Fernando, you're saying maybe this isn't the place to talk about this. I think this is exactly the place to talk about this. This is something that we're now wanting to jump in there. So it's great. I mean, that was a super panel. Thank you to everybody. And Sergio, I mean, that quotation that you finished with is fantastic. And that starts off our book on Paulo Emílio Salles Gomes. So it's a brilliant, the quote from, I can remember who it is, Clayton and Cleven. It's a wonderful quotation. I thought it was really interesting that you didn't mention Portugal once in your talk, but you kind of, I mean, I know you and I know your work and I know how, sort of committed you are to, sort of promoting Lusophone filmmaking and part, your Imagine Movimento kind of group, are very sort of do a really great job in promoting that too. But yeah, I'm tying back to this idea of, we have to teach Orson Welles. I mean, as someone who can teach students who have the ability to follow films in Portuguese, you have the richness of the Portuguese, sort of heritage, Brazilian cinema novo, if you want to stick with the kind of more canonical kind of material, new Brazilian cinema, really fantastic at the moment, Portuguese, incredible, plus the Portuguese language African films that you can tap into too. So you don't need to, in that sense, someone who has the ability to teach in Portuguese really doesn't need to teach Orson Welles. So it was just to throw that into the mix, but by all means respond, or if Deborah and Dolores are wanting to sort of, talk about the same thing, Sergio, go ahead. All right.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I agree with Nuria and Stephanie. I mean, if I'm teaching, and I do teach a module on, it's a kind of introduction to film studies. I don't show Citizen Kane, and I don't need Citizen Kane. But if you're teaching 2 modules on film history, I mean, it's understandable that you show Citizen Kane. My point was just that, I mean, you should also show, I don't know, Germaine Dulac as a great female filmmaker, or Osmane Sembene as a great African filmmaker. And if you pick up a book on film history, sometimes those filmmakers and films are absent. They're excluded. So yeah, so I was just saying that I mean I agree. If you're teaching film language or a kind of introduction to film studies, I don't think you need Citizen Kane. And in fact, I think it would be interesting just to use, for example, Portuguese films, since Stephanie talked about that. I mean, a lot of the films that I write about in my book are Portuguese. So I was just trying to, in my paper, I was just trying to sort of figure out my own stance about film practice, and I'm influenced by other film critics who are not Portuguese. I mean, there's I mean, I can summarize it this way. Portugal doesn't have a great tradition in film criticism. That's the whole truth about that. So there's a new movement in film criticism, in groups of people that have come together and created websites to publish their film criticism, and that's much more alive than anything that happened before, really. So, and in fact, one of those film critics, which is also he also teaches at a university, he reviewed my book. So I think they were interested in my own film criticism, and there's a kind of connection between those different different generations of film critics. But I think what's going on today, it's much more interesting than we had in the past. Yeah.
Maybe I think Dolores raised her hand first. We have 7 more minutes, so let's try and answer all the questions.
Is my video on? I hid my video because I couldn't. So my house was really noisy, and they've all finally gone. But I'm broadly in agreement about all the points that have been raised about, you know, decentering Citizen Kane, etc. I just wanted to ask the panelists. I really enjoyed all your papers in this idea of being more inclusive. You know, is teaching film criticism or creating students who are in one way film critics, is it about giving them a knowledge of the canon, or is it teaching them to formally analyze the language, to explore any film as being about the world, you know, so that kind of Cavelian, Bazinian notion that, you know, this is about metaphysics. What is it? Because some of my best students, I realize, you know, in retrospect, are students who came to me with no canonical knowledge and maybe, but could do this amazing analysis. They came to film as a form that they could read, and they were so empowered by it. And then, you know, subsequently, they might have gone on into postgraduate study where they've started to build up that canonical knowledge because they need it. But, you know, they came and it wasn't a problem. And then I've had other students who've come with that kind of encyclopedic, and, you know, Fernando sort of said it, that kind of fanboy or boys club kind of idea of film criticism. And they really couldn't write an analytical, philosophical essay about film. So I just wondered, as educators, where you stand on that kind of, what is it we're doing? You know, and I'm someone, again, who tries to use Mexican films to teach formal analysis. If I can Because as we've all said, students struggle with Citizen Kane. It's a bit slow for them. They can't watch it. They just can't. They can't sit through the screening. They struggle with that. They can see a clip or two, but give it to them for a screening. Okay, so what do you guys think about that? About this kind of...
Maybe since we don't have much time, we'll hear Deborah, and then you can answer both questions. Maybe. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with Stephanie that things take on their own kind of dynamic and become the thing to talk about, which sometimes displaces some of the other things to talk about. And it's interesting, we all wanted to kind of chip in here. I think what's really at stake here is a kind of Anglo-Eurocentrism, Hollywood centrism in film culture. And I was very struck, and I'll come to this in a minute, of Fernando's paper of Spanish film popular critics not writing about Hispanic film culture, Latin American or Spanish. And a question I'll come to is it because there's an ignorance there, they don't know about it, or that they're not choosing, it's not what interests them? And I think that's partly connected with what we're teaching and how we're teaching, with this kind of idea of canons, which of course are always evolving. So what's canonical for us is very different from what's canonical for our students. You know, Fernando talked about David Fincher, for instance, which is the kind of new canon, perhaps, you know, and I was also thinking, wouldn't it be a great title for a collection of Teaching Citizen Kane, ? Anyway, I'm throwing in loads of ideas here, but one of the things I was also thinking was the way things get taught in silos. So, you know, I have a course on world and transnational cinema. Does that then leave my colleagues free to only focus on Hollywood? And this is where I think there's a problem, that we need a more integrated model, and not just talk about diversity of, oh, she's doing women and world, so I can do this. You know, it's much more interesting and exciting to teach films from all over the world. So yes to Citizen Kane, but also to Lucrecia Martel on the same course, for example. So, you know, I don't want to make this is more of a comment than a question, although clearly it's more millions of comments, but there is kind of a question as well, which is, I guess the question to Fernando, which is, you know, do people from non-Anglophone countries know their film culture? Is there a kind of neo-colonial focus on Hollywood films? This is when I realized I'm on mute the whole time. No, I'm not.
No. Yeah, I was thinking about it. I was also thinking, I was also trying to come back to this question you also posed about, is it ignorance or is it lack of interest on this subjects? And I don't think you can really put. I think both things go hand in hand. It is ignorance because, or it's lack of interest because there is ignorance on this subject. No? But at the same time, you also mentioned, was it a problem of teaching? I don't know. I don't think it's a problem of teaching. I think it's a problem of general, I mean, for lack of a better word, general film culture during the last 20-30 years in Spain in particular. I mean, this is a very subjective impression, and I will be pleased if Nuria and Jara especially would like to correct me. But this generation has been brought up without really interest in, or with references with contemporary references in Spanish cinema that could be attractive to them, I would say. And I think the same goes for Latin American cinema. And I think that started to change at the end of the 1990s, I would say. But as long as I can remember, as for me, Spanish cinema was not an option. And if this was the case, and something I've been talking about with some of these bloggers, you start to rediscover the Spanish film history for yourself when you start to deal with this. Well, we start writing, and you want to know a little bit more about what were you really writing about. But I think that contrary to this latest initiatives put into action by the academia in the last 5 years, I think before that there was no interest in promoting Spanish cinemas and as an attractive alternative for young people. But anyway, this is a very subjective impression. So I don't know, Nuria or Jara, if that's your opinion, or is it another light?
I just, before we forget Dolores' question, because I think it's very important.
Sure.
I think it's all a bit related. The interest of our students in a particular kind of film or not, what brings them to do film studies in the first place. We cannot neglect that, because if they come to university and they want to do film with us, you know, my students are driven by their love of language, but also some of them because they've watched Spanish films and they became curious about them and wanted to know more. So, you know, both things bring them in. And then if we then take them to the classroom and say, you know, all those things that you really like, we don't want you to watch those. We don't want you to write about those. You know, you're going to learn these other things that we really like. And that's what you should know. And I've increasingly become worried about that. As for the film criticism teaching, you see, I don't teach film criticism. And it's a shame that colleagues like Cecilia Sayat cannot be here today because she teaches film criticism and her modules are incredibly popular. And I know that she's thought about these questions that Dolores, you've posed very, very frequently, because we've talked about it many times. You know, what is it that we're supposed to be teaching them in this kind of things? But for me, is if we get them in, I don't want to lose them by imposing a film culture that is mine because I was born in 1965. And I worry about that because, you know, it's hard enough to get them to do film in a language that is not English. It's hard enough to get them interested in film cultures that are not in English. And then if they come in and I say to them, yeah, you know, Volver, it's not a very good film, is it? I mean, let's watch them. You know what I mean? It's just that's my worry. Is I want to be able to transition them maybe to something more complex. I want them to think, I want them to become more sophisticated, but I don't want to lose them.
That's a lovely discussion because I can't even mention Citizen Kane to my students. So I have to teach film language using Rosalia's video or Sitangana's videos. That's how I get them to know how a pan is or something like that. So that's a very interesting question. How do you approach? And as Nuria was saying, how you don't lose them, you know? For me so far is using their own reference. So I'm teaching, literally this course, I've been teaching film language using Rosalia.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if anyone, we are 4 minutes over time so that we have some lunch time, unless someone has something they really want to share. If not, so enjoy your lunch and we will be back. Yes, I mean, congratulations to everyone. This was a fantastic panel. It was a pleasure listening to all of you. And we will be back at 1:15 to our first Latin American panel with Marcelo Iqueda from Brazil and Sarah Barrow from East Anglia. I don't know if there's anything Alice wants to add or Stephanie, or if we can just go to lunch.
I think, yeah, that's great. That was perfect. I think, yeah, lunchtime now.
Yeah. Okay. So see you all back at 1:15.